Imagine you were born in the year 1482, not into nobility, not into art, music, or silk, but into a peasant family in the hills outside Florence, where winters bit through your rags and summers melted the skin off your shoulders. You were a girl, which meant your body would one day become someone else's tool. But no one told you how soon that would happen, or how cruelly. By age 15, you had survived a hard childbirth. Your own baby, barely swaddled, suckled weakly at your chest. But within days, a stranger arrived. He didn't ask. He told you the Medici family needed a balia, a wet nurse to feed their newborn. The noble woman couldn't nurse, or wouldn't. And you had milk. And that made you useful. You weren't being hired. You were being rented out. Your own baby was pulled from your arms, sent to another farm to be wet nursed by someone else, if they could find anyone at all. Many times, peasant babies like yours died within weeks of separation, but that wasn't their concern. You were cleaned, dressed in a coarse but presentable frock, and delivered to the city like livestock. No one explained what would happen next. You walked into a mansion filled with polished floors, painted ceilings, and eyes watching your every move. You were told to hold the baby of a countess, a child that wore linen finer than anything you had ever touched in your life. It latched onto your breast without hesitation, and with that, your job began. But make no mistake, this was not some maternal arrangement. This was business. You had to feed the baby every few hours, never be seen dirty, sleep lightly in case the child stirred, eat only foods approved by the physician, avoid sex entirely, or risk spoiling the milk your own name. Forgotten, you were la balia, that was it. And if the noble baby so much as sniffled, you would be blamed. If the child died, you might be beaten, or worse, imprisoned. You weren't just feeding someone else's baby. You were starving your own to keep another alive. Because Renaissance doctors believed a woman only had so much good milk in her body. Giving it to two babies was forbidden, especially if one was of noble blood. So your milk went to the wealthy child, and your baby, far away in a stranger's care, was given gruel, wine-soaked bread, or worse, nothing at all. Infant mortality among peasant children was staggering. Historical records from Florence showed that over 50% of rural wet nurses' children died before the age of 2. Many during the exact months their mothers were away nursing aristocratic babies. And still, when you asked to visit your child, they said no. They said your emotions could sour the milk. They said you belonged to the baby of the house now. Let me tell you about Thomasina, a wet nurse documented in a Medici household account book from the late 1400s. She was paid a small wage, not in coins, but in cheese and candles. She nursed the noble child for 14 months straight, under strict watch. Her contract forbade her from returning home. 1 year later, when she was finally released, her own baby had died of fever. Thomasina's name appears once more in the records, listed as a mourner at a church service paid for not by her, but by the house that had rented her body. There is no mention of whether she ever nursed again. There is no mention of her own grief. When the baby weaned, or died, you were sent home. But home was a broken version of what you left behind. Your husband, if he waited, saw you differently. Some men rejected their wives after wet nursing, believing their bodies were spoiled or defiled. Others blamed you for the death of the child you left behind. Some never welcomed you back at all. So you wandered milkless, grief-stricken, and labeled a milkmaid, no longer fit for anything else. And if you were unlucky, you'd be hired again. Your breasts were not your own, not your choice, not your child, not your rules. Every day your body was policed. Noble families didn't just hire you. They controlled you. They inspected your milk like they were inspecting wine. Too watery, too thick, wrong color. You could be sent away in disgrace. And the superstitions ... they were endless. You were forced to wear herb-stuffed amulets around your neck to purify your milk. Sage, fennel, and blessed thistles dangled over your chest. Not for healing, but to protect the baby from your peasant impurity. They made you avoid garlic and onions. Not for the baby's health, but because they thought strong smells corrupted your soul. Some households even banned you from crying. Because a wet nurse's sadness, they believed, would poison the child through her milk. So when you missed your dead baby, you smiled. When your breasts ached from overfeeding, you endured, because if they sensed a sour mood, a hint of anger, or any emotion at all, they said your milk would go bad. Breast infections were common. Your nipples cracked, bled, sometimes even became infected. You couldn't stop feeding. There were no breaks, no breast pumps, no doctors to help, just cloth and prayers. And when you begged to rest, they told you the child would inherit your laziness. So you kept going. Hour after hour, day after day. The irony, these elite mothers, the same ones who shunned your body, often celebrated their femininity by boasting about how motherly they were. They showed off chubby babies in portraits. They embroidered initials on silken bibs. But the child didn't know their scent, didn't feel their heartbeat, didn't cry for them when hungry. They cried for you, and yet, when those children grew up, they forgot your name. They remembered the cradle, the toys, the silk, but not the hands that fed them. Imagine being surrounded by a family, and yet, utterly alone. That was your reality. You lived inside the noble home, but you were never truly part of it. You ate in the kitchen with the scullery maids. You slept in a cold attic or tiny servant's room, sometimes in the same room as the baby. But no one celebrated your presence. No one asked how you were doing. You weren't allowed to write letters. You weren't allowed visitors. And if you were caught speaking in your local dialect, you were scolded, mocked, even fined. You were expected to become invisible. A pair of breasts, a milk machine, nothing more. Some wet nurses were even renamed by their employers, given new, nicer names. You were no longer Katerina or Giovanna. You were Mama Lucia or simply Nana. It was easier for them to forget you that way. And when your contract ended, they gave you a few coins, maybe some old linens, and sent you away. You returned home, but your child might be gone. Some wet nurses came back to empty cribs and freshly dug graves. No one had time or money to feed your baby while you were gone. And the guilt, it never left. In 1543, in the city of Ferrara, a court record tells the story of a wet nurse named Lucetta di Ben. She had served a wealthy merchant family for almost 2 years, nursing their only son. But when her own child died in her absence, she collapsed at the noble home's doorstep, begging them to release her early. They refused. Lucetta broke down in the marketplace, screaming, "My breasts saved their boy, and yet my own has turned to dust." She was dragged away, accused of public hysteria. Her grief was not just ignored, it was criminalized. Nothing. The church praised you for your service to families. Nobles applauded themselves for elevating poor women with jobs. And physicians kept publishing pamphlets about how to pick the perfect wet nurse, like you were livestock. But no one asked how it felt. No one cared about your pain, your sacrifice, your story. Imagine this. You've given your milk, your time, your love, and now it's over, just like that. The noble child no longer needs you. He's weaned, and suddenly, you're no longer a necessity. You're an expense. So they do what everyone else does. They let you go. You held that baby when he first opened his eyes. You soothed his fevers, rocked him during storms, kissed his forehead in silence. He knew your scent, your voice, not his mother's. But when you said goodbye, he was pulled from your arms, like laundry from the line. You weren't invited back. You weren't remembered in portraits. You were erased. In Florence, in the 1460s, a noble woman named Alessandra Mascinghi Strozzi wrote letters to her sons. She described how she dismissed one wet nurse who had cared for the children for more than 16 months. She cried much upon leaving. The babe also reached for her. But it is not fitting for a child to love a servant so. Alessandra had another nurse waiting at the door, already hired, already lactating. No pause, no gratitude, just replacement. Some wet nurses were sent to work in remote mountain villas or damp, malaria-ridden countryside estates. Illness was common, especially for those forced to continue nursing well beyond a healthy limit. With weakened bodies and constant exposure to others' sickly children, many wet nurses died alone, unnamed and unburied in family plots. No one wrote their names, but they fed generations of Europe's elite. For survival, to keep a roof over your family's head, to avoid starving during a famine, because a woman's body was often the only currency she could offer in a world that never gave her value. You did it because you had no other choice, and history barely mentions you. No statues, no books, just lines in household records, receipts, and maybe, if you were lucky, a single tear-stained letter you wrote but never sent. You gave your body, you gave your bond, and when they no longer needed you, they erased you. That was the price of survival. For a woman history barely noticed. If this story moved you, like this video, subscribe to hear the lives they never taught us about, because the empires you know were built on backs like yours.